what makes us different is we're number one focused on Black issues.
Yeah.
Black people, Black residents, and organizations that serve them.
Welcome to the IAAQLI 6 Pillars in Action podcast, where we deep dive into the transformative impact of the work being done in Indianapolis Black communities. Get ready to be inspired by the incredible projects and organizations making a real difference in the lives of Indianapolis residents. And that conversation starts right now.
Welcome to 6 Pillars in Action, a podcast dedicated to taking an in-depth look at the transformational work of the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative, or IAAQLI, to save my breath.
Yes.
I am your host, Samantha Douglas, and today we have Tony Mason here with us, the president and CEO of Indianapolis Urban League.
Thank you, Samantha. Just excited to be here to have this conversation about IAQLI.
Yeah, so I know for many folks, you need no introduction, but for the folks who do need to get to know you, tell us about how you got involved with Urban League, and then also what's your personal connection to this work?
Sure, absolutely. I first got involved with the Indianapolis Urban League back in 2003. I was invited to attend a meeting where my predecessor, Mr. Joe Slash, was launching a new initiative under the Indianapolis Urban League's banner called the Young Professionals, new auxiliary. Fast forward, I ended up becoming one of the founders and the first president of that organization. And through that experience, I had the opportunity to serve on the board of directors with this organization. And so that introduced me to the Urban League movement. And if you fast forward to 2014, in the fall of 2014, I was hired to become the president and CEO, and I've been in that role since that time. And my connection as president and CEO to the IAQLI is that we are part of the partnership that has made this initiative become possible.
Yeah, and so that's why I just wanted to give that little backdrop before we dug into what the IAAQLI is, how it came about. So I guess we'll start there. Just talk about how it was established and why, probably more importantly.
Sure. Well, if you go back to 2020, and we had a confluence of things that were going on at that time. We had the onset of the pandemic. We had the backlash reaction to George Floyd and things that were happening, frankly, in this community, where, as we know, for decades, African Americans have struggled. Yes, there's been progress, but there have been struggles on so many levels. And when you look at Indianapolis and this region, we have a population of about 250,000 African Americans, and at least 30% are poor or working poor. And so when you look at the economic situation that African Americans find themselves in order to solve issues around equity and equality in this community, you have to address the quality of living of African Americans. And so we were very fortunate that we were contacted and approached by the Lilly Endowment about a unique opportunity, a transformational opportunity, where they wanted to provide funding to the organization to do significant work in this community. And so it was with that opportunity that is, when the endowment calls you, it's an amazing thing, frankly. But for us, it provided us with the opportunity to come up with a proposal that we felt would not just honor the work that we do as an affiliate, but as many people know, our tagline is empowering communities and changing lives. As the Indianapolis Urban League, we know we cannot do this work alone. And so the idea of engaging the African American Coalition of Indianapolis in this process, and the National Urban League itself, because we're one of 92 Urban League affiliates across the country, and we're in our 60th year, by the way. And so to be able to create the opportunity whereby which resources could flow into the community and be used as a part of a place-based grant-making effort, whereby which we would be engaging the community to help come up with the strategies and the solutions, but also empowering the community by putting these resources out there to help organizations and individuals to do this work.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions was Was it the endowment that came to you, or did you guys come up with this first? So basically, they just kind of came saying like, "Hey, we really want to impact the Black community in a positive way," and just opened up for you guys to make this suggestion.
Yeah, I mean, an amazing conversation. Frankly, we want to give you a significant transformational grant, but we can't give it to you because of the amount. It would have actually affected our 501c3 tax classification. So true to the endowment's form, they'll give you some time to contemplate an idea. You come back with the concept, you discuss it, and if they like it, then you move forward with it. So the first conversation was with, after speaking to the endowment, was with the National Urban League and with President Mark Morial. And a funny conversation. How much do they want to give you all, Tony?
Yeah.
5 million, 10 million. I said, no, sir. 50 million. Silence on the other end of the phone.
Yeah.
But then finally he says, how can we help? Well, we would need for the National Urban League to receive the dollars. But with this, the explicit understanding that the dollars have to flow back into Indianapolis, Marion County specifically, to impact African Americans.
Right.
With education, entrepreneurship, employment, health, housing, civic engagement, and leadership development. Also, for us, the importance of being able to leverage the National Urban League, its platform, its resources as a part of the work became important as well. And then the other key part of this was recognizing that we can't do this work alone. And so the important engagement of the African American Coalition of Indianapolis to be a part of this work.
Yeah.
That organization, a loose coalition of organizations, a group of groups, so to speak. Those are the terms of my great colleague, Willis Bright, who you'll hear from eventually. He'll talk about that. But the fact that over 20 organizations have been involved with AACI over 20 years. So again, we can't do this work alone. Well, what better way than to pull the coalition into this and to have us all earnestly begin to work together to solve and to address problems.
Yeah. There's, I think it was funny because when you said 50 million, because that's one of the first questions I had when I found out we were going to have this conversation. I was like, oh my God, I got to hear like how you felt, because it has to feel amazing when you hear this incredible amount of money that's going to go in our community, but it also had to feel like a weight, right? Like, because there's so much responsibility behind that as well. Can you talk about that?
Well, absolutely. Well, when someone says 50 million to you and you do your best to try to pretend that, oh, that's not a big deal, you've been there, done that.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. But then to go back after having conversations with Mark Morial and the National Urban League and also with my good friends with AACI, well, the reaction was, well, Tony, you know what? We really like the concept and the idea. Let's just make it 100 million.
Yeah.
Now, at that point, I don't know whether to laugh, cry, or whatever it is, but here's the reality. Obviously, with the resources come a great sense of responsibility and purpose. And so I'm just thankful that the endowment saw fit to think about the Indianapolis Urban League in that light and the work that we're doing in the community, and our ability to hopefully bring people around the table who would be willing to do this work, recognizing that it's going to be a collective effort to work towards collective impact to make a difference.
So did you guys already have, before you talk team or really put together that team, did you come up with a plan for the money first, or did you come up with the team first?
It started with team first. Team first, and I knew going into this, as I shared, African American Coalition was important because it was being led by Mr. Willis Bright. And I was viewing this strategically as, I'm sure someone at Lilly Endowment or out in the universe would say, well, what in the heck does Tony Mason and the Urban League know about doing something of this magnitude?
Yeah.
Well, who would be better than Mr. Willis Bright to help with this effort? I mean, he had been at the endowment for over 25 years and understands philanthropy far better than I ever could. He's probably forgotten more than I've learned in the past 5 years in this space. And so I was just thankful that Mr. Bright would be willing to step up and help with this process. Considering, he's a retiree. I mean, he could be somewhere on a beach enjoying a cocktail or something. but he was willing to come alongside to make this possible by working with me on it. And of course, he brought Dr. Carlin Tishner to the table, who I had never met Carlin before. But when we convened a small meeting of the team, so to speak, somewhere out in the middle of nowhere between Martinsville and Bloomington, and I'll never forget it, in this cabin, and we walk in, and this young man, Dr. Tishner's there, and he quickly figured out how to manage and handle both Willis and I in a conversation, because we can get distracted, all off track and all of that, and at the same time have great ideas that may or may not be able to be operationalized. And so it's like, wow, okay, this is a brilliant brother. And of course, we added Alicia Barrett to the team, and her day job as well as with Strada Education Network. She has been just a rock star around building the platform and the system for which we could do this work. And then she helped us to recruit Danica Thomas to the team. And before Danica was even a thought or an idea, Alicia said, I have the perfect person that could help us with this. And so, of course, Danica's dynamic. She's got a lot of skills, and she's pretty adept at managing all of us as well as the grantees. And so we've got an amazing team. But then we also have a number of consultants and individuals in the community that have leaned in, as well as some key community partners and individuals and civic leaders who played a part in helping us to establish the goals and the priorities and the strategies for the initiative.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that backdrop. When we come back, we are going to have 2 more members of the IAAQLI, and we'll really get more into the nitty-gritty of the 6 pillars and everything else that really goes into this initiative.
Coming up next on the 6 Pillars in Action podcast, we'll continue our conversation with IAAQLI leaders. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and visit the IAAQLI website to learn more about the incredible work being done and how you can get involved.
We are back with 6 Pillars in Action, where we are covering the work of the IAAQLI. And first up, we have Mr. Willis Bright, the chair of the African American Coalition of Indianapolis and also the co-director of the IAAQLI. So again, just like Mr. Mason, I'm sure there are many people in the city that do not need an introduction. But for those who do, just kind of tell us a little bit about yourself when you started this work and how you're connected to the work now.
I have been in philanthropic work for a number of years in a corporate foundation at the Honeywell Foundation in Minneapolis, then moved to Indianapolis more than 30 years ago to work for the Lilly Endowment, and worked for the Lilly Endowment for 27 years, both in terms of community development, housing, African American community development, but many of the years focused on youth programs and coordinated our grant making for community-based programs. So between my experiences both at Honeywell and also at Lilly Endowment, and my past life as a university professor where I was at a Center for Youth Development and Research, got a lot of background and knowledge in terms of community issues and community concerns.
Yeah.
And that's I have brought to the enterprise of IAAQLI.
Yeah. So first of all, Tony Mason pointed out that you could be somewhere retired, on a beach, but what keeps you here? What keeps you serving our community?
Well, I had parents who instilled in us that we were to use our talents and time and energy to improve our community, and that's my training as a social worker. But when I got a call from my colleague and friend Tony Mason, said, hey, here's an opportunity. And we had worked together with the African American Coalition of Indianapolis, which I'd been chair of for many years, trying to address communities' issues within the African American community, identifying problems that needed to be addressed. And when he said, hey, how would you like to team up on administering a grant program to address some of those concerns, said, sure. And then when he told me the dollar amount that we might have,
that's what
I said, you are really sure that I'm ready to do this. So it evolved out of that kind of a conversation. And ultimately, we had a conversation with my former colleagues at Lilly Endowment and consummated a deal.
Yeah, that's amazing. I know, like in the community, especially nonprofit work, it seems like we're always begging for funding. And so it's incredible when you get an opportunity like this where it's like, no, hey, we want to give an incredible amount of money to you all to help especially the African American community specifically. And so when you thought about that and you thought about the work that the African American Coalition does, what was that connection there that you really wanted to make sure happened?
Well, the connection was a real one, real in the sense that AACI for many years had sought to identify what were the key issues impacting our community so that we could present those concerns to people at the General Assembly, the mayor's office. We could bring leaders who were trying to address certain issues to talk to our 20 plus members. So we had been immersed in issue identification and trying to come up with practical solutions that might help in public policy and in programs that might be able to benefit and address some of the concerns. This opportunity to be able to provide funds that might go to organizations that were addressing some of those concerns really added another dimension to work that the Urban League does every day and that AACI did from a policy and issue identification perspective.
So when you heard about this opportunity, what was the first thing you thought? Like, okay, step one, we have to do this.
Well, you have a pile of money.
Yeah.
And you have to decide how we're going to do this.
Right.
So long and short of the matter, the first thing we had to do was, we have to develop an organizational structure for the distribution of the resources, which would mean that we have to develop proposal formats, we have to develop a process for screening, we have to have consultants and people who have reviewed. In effect, we had to put together a design for a very fast-moving, flexible community foundation.
Yes, because that's how it operates.
Yes.
That's incredible. So when you thought about people that you really wanted to be on this team, when you were thinking about, listen, to really get this done, I know Tony Mason mentioned that you brought Carlin into the work, but what were you thinking when you thought about people? Like, these people have to be a part of it to really make this thing successful.
Well, I knew that we would need someone who could help really keep the movement going and help us keep it organized. And I had been acquainted with a young man, a native of Indianapolis, Dr. Carlin Tishner, and I saw in him someone that I felt that both Tony and I could work with and that I could work with, because I knew I'd be working pretty closely with him, who would be able to help us not only add shape and form, but would be able to help drive. And that we knew also that we were not going to staff up and have a lot of people, so we would have to develop a system for recruiting and selecting consultants who would help us review proposals. So again, we had to develop a structure and needing people to do that, and then it grew from that. We then had Alicia Baird, who also had foundation experience, but she knew about data and data management and about organizing systems. And then Danica Thomas, who came on, she had worked in not-for-profits, but she knew about everything from events to basically how you organize communication systems and how you coordinate work and keep a team flowing and moving. So with that, I think we then had the essentials for putting something forward to the community that would work. We had people who knew how to design systems. We had people who knew how to move the work. We had people who knew how to go out and identify problems and to check to see whether proposals that were being developed were in fact meeting something. And we also had folks who knew how to work together comfortably. And that's really critical in a situation like this. You got to have people who not only out of their own values are committed to the community and know their stuff, but also are flexible and willing to work hard to get something done, because this was not our exclusive day job for some of our team members.
So I know before you talked about through your work with the coalition, you guys already had a really good handle on the challenges that you needed to combat. Was there one that really stuck out to you that, like, man, first thing, we need to hit that?
Well, I mean, AACI had defined over the years many of the issues that are, quite frankly, the priority issues of IAAQLI. But we did not trust that that would be the issues that we would lead off on by the fact, I mean, housing we knew was a great concern, employment, education, et cetera. But we needed to have a process for validating whether people from within the community, both individuals, organizations, and others, whether they saw those as relevant issues. Yeah. So in effect, the bedrock for identifying concerns had been done by AACI, but we developed within IAAQLI a process and means to engage the community, the African American community, to help validate, but also to come up with concerns that individuals felt we should address with the resources that we had available to us.
Yeah, and I mean, that makes sense. You know, Tony Mason brought up that at that moment we were in a super critical time, a lot of protests, there was a lot of things going on. So those things can change like quickly over time, and our focus can change. I think I'm so glad that you brought up that you guys incorporated new information into that, making sure that community is involved throughout that. Thank you for giving me this really background into how the coalition is involved with the IAAQLI work. When we come back, we're going to have Carlin Tenchner here to talk more about the 6 pillars and how they're actually being put to work in the community.
Coming up next on the 6 Pillars in Action podcast, we'll continue our conversation with IAAQLI leaders. And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and visit the IAAQLI website to learn more about the incredible work being done and how you can get involved.
And we are back with 6 Pillars in Action. I'm your host, Samantha Douglas. And unlike our first 2 guests, this one needs all the introduction. Dr. Tenchner, introduce yourself. Tell us about how you got involved with the work, much like the other 2, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, you can call me Carlin. I'm absolutely not that formal. That's not where I got the degree. So my background, I am a mental health therapist by trade, couple and family therapist, but by function, an educator. And I've done a lot of project management through my consulting firm, as well as really working to integrate mental health and education into spaces that it either demands or is not currently there. But most of my work has really, lately in the last 7.5, 10 years, has really been around using systems thinking, systems work to impact community, organizations, culture, and which has led me to be on this project, which I'm excited to share more about today. So I'm glad to be here.
So you got the call from two legends.
Yeah.
How did that feel?
Yeah, so I had the great privilege of working with Willis Bright, my friend and colleague, prior to the moment of the call. He invited me through his consulting firm to do some work with a nonprofit organization that's statewide here in Indiana. And I think that was my audition, to be honest, right? Like, while I didn't know that opportunity would come from it, I think he was always assessing my ability. And so after that work, or during that work, we developed a friendship, and we actually decided to take this trip. And we were out of town, and he said, hey, I have a meeting coming in tomorrow. When the individual gets here, the conversation we're going to have, you can't tell anybody about. And I was like, what kind of meeting is this? So I immediately, the next day, in walks Tony Mason. And at the point, I didn't know Tony. So that was our first introduction. And it turned out that they were having their first planning meeting around this investment, which is historic. And they welcomed me into that conversation. And I would say since then, I've had an opportunity to be a participant, and it's been great.
I know they said that this came together quickly. Like, how quickly? What is quick?
Wow. So I would say that after that conversation, within about 2 weeks, we were already identifying team, identifying our strategy to get voice and choice from community, and really thinking around implementation. So quickly was in 2 months.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
So I know that before we started to really touch on the issue identification process.
Yeah.
So tell us more about that, like how you guys really tapped on community and got to hear what they wanted to be addressed.
Absolutely. So I'll just give you an illustration of one of the conversations we were having in that random place south of Martinsville. We had a chart. Willis loves white chart
Y'all gotta
paper.
stop going south of Martinsville
Well,
now.
that was the one and
That's
only time.
one. Okay, so we can get back to it now.
One
Go ahead.
time, right. Well, so we had chart paper, and we immediately start to think about this triangle approach to community voice and opportunity. And I would say it was actually an inverted triangle. That was our first discussion of we need to get people's voice into this conversation. We knew we were going to address social determinants of health, generally speaking, within the Black community, but we didn't know how we would engage the community first in helping us identify what it is that they thought were priorities, right? I mean, you could argue that everybody knew the issues in the Black community. You can just read a research article and learn that. But what you don't know is what everyone believes the issues are primarily and how they want to address it. And so soon after that conversation, we began to conceptualize two processes. One was the issues prioritization process, which I'll explain in a minute. And then the other was the comprehensive opportunities assessment. These two processes operated at the same time. So simply, the issues prioritization process was a process by which we learn and understand the priorities of grass tops individuals, folks that have been doing the work around social determinants of health, who can articulate not what you need to do, but what do you need to prioritize with this investment. And simultaneous, we had our friends at Engaging Solutions do the comprehensive opportunities assessment, where they actually engaged the grassroots individuals, where they were going to residents and asking them, if you had $1 million, $100 million, what would you do with it? My agency, Carl and Jane Associates, was responsible for the issues prioritization process, and as I said, Engaging Solutions did the other side. Our task was to bridge both reports, both learnings, into a set of priorities that became the priorities under which we invested under each pillar.
Mm-hmm. So tell us about the 6 pillars. What are the 6 pillars?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, with social determinants of health, generally speaking, they represent those pillars, those categories, but not all. So you have education, you have employment, you have health and wellness, housing, business and entrepreneurship, and then leadership and civic engagement. And so if you imagine any ecosystem for any population of individuals, but especially those who are marginalized, for them to have high quality of life, which is within our name, they need to be able to see and benefit from each of those 6 categories. And our funding mechanism is through nonprofits, so our goal has always been to fund nonprofits who are addressing those 6 pillars.
So when when you guys were working with or talking to community, getting this feedback, and then thinking about these social determinants of health that you were already looking at, what did anything surprise you all? And that's for Mr. Bright. Like, did anything surprise you all about what came out of this collection of information?
I don't think we were surprised so much by some of the issues, but by the intensity of people's concern and passion about some of the issues. Education as a concern, ensuring that folks have adequate housing, all of those things we knew categorically, but the process that Carlin's addressed, it gave us an opportunity to get underneath that global categorical thing. Education, it led us into concerns about retaining teachers of color, under health, dealing with the mental health of kids. So what the process has allowed us to do was to get beyond the gross categories and to get into the identifiable issues that people had concerns or passion about.
Mm-hmm. So when you talked about the intensity, tell me more about that. Like what did you guys see? What was that intensity that you saw?
Mm-hmm. You can say.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, so I think it's important to know, and Tony mentioned this, I think, in the previous podcast where he was talking about the structure of the team. So we've kept ourselves pretty thin, but the benefit of being thin is that Willis, Tony have an incredible Rolodex, including Alicia Baird, an incredible Rolodex of individuals who are experts in their own right. And what that meant, though, is that we had to leverage expertise to help us facilitate these conversations. Mm-hmm. And so each of the pillars in the issues prioritization process actually had an expert facilitator. Oh. Those individuals were experts in that pillar, right? So housing and home ownership had a educated expert who's been doing the work for 20 years in housing. So that would naturally, and we were doing it during COVID, which I think is important. We were doing a bunch of Zoom conversations led by these experts, coordinated, and allowing us to get the voice of these individuals who represented all of these parts of the pillars. Now, imagine 25 different people meeting every time under one of those pillars. 25 different people who have different passions and belief systems, but generally all want the same thing. So those facilitators had to coordinate that conversation. And it was difficult. It was definitely difficult, but I again want to applaud each of those leaders because they were able to take comprehensive engagement, but also different opinions, thought processes, and values coordinated in a way that they can come up with a set of things which we think manifested well.
And while it might be obvious from the name of the initiative, the Indianapolis African American Quality of Life Initiative, I think it bears saying specifically that we wanted resource people, researchers, we wanted consultants, and we wanted the organizations through which we would try to provide resources to address conditions to be African American led, African American boards, and when there were not those, that there were people within the organization or the board who could bring a perspective from the African American community. So I think it's critical to say at core of our overall work and thinking is how can we enable the dollars to be used as well as the other policy and programmatic issues that we've tried to influence, but to do that from a perspective of a holism that engaged the intellect, the spirit, and the passion of the African American community.
So I know you guys actually started to touch on it already, but before we go, tell us what was different? What's different about this funding process? I know you likened it to really like a foundation and stuff, but what's different about you all, about IAAQLI?
Yeah, I'll start, and then I think Willis should close this comment out. But my belief, though, is grateful for the investment, right? It was a one-time investment, hopefully future opportunities for the same investment, to tell a story, to give us an opportunity to tell a story. And this story for us that I feel makes us different is, number one, while we are technically a foundation, we're not fundamentally a foundation.
Right.
So we have some flexibilities. We have some ability to identify organizations that have traditionally been underfunded, grassroots organizations that have been doing the work that may not be able to pass the test of an endowment in a formal way, but we get to take the proverbial risk. Yeah. With some capacity building, some support mechanisms, some consulting to help them become that organization that would be funded by a more traditional foundation. But more importantly, from our vantage point, we'll have access and the opportunity through our funding to do more of the work that they've been doing so well and many times out of their own pockets. And so what makes us different is we're, number one, focused on Black issues.
Yeah.
Black people, Black residents, and organizations that serve them. Number two, that we are interested and willing to build the capacity of underserved organizations that have traditionally been underfunded. And number three, our goal is to tell a story, a comprehensive story of what $100 million can do and what additional dollars can continue to do. Because $100 million is a lot, but we know that cities and states spend $100 million in 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And so, and the issues in our community are far beyond $100 million, right? And so this is an opportunity to leverage the story, to be able to expand the opportunity forward to continue investment or co-investment.
Yeah.
And another thing that it made this particular initiative unique here in Indiana, especially, but even in many parts of the U.S., a major national foundation gave dollars to African American institutions to be intentional about problem solving in the African American community. I think in retrospect, many years down the line, that unique quality will be noted as race conscious and race-based philanthropy will be something that may very well be increasingly challenged in the public arena.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with you. I think we're already seeing pieces of that. So I know it's gone quick. It's gone so quick, but we're already at the end of this episode. I want to thank you all for being with us today. Obviously, if you enjoyed this podcast and you want to keep watching it, staying connected with us, make sure you follow us on IAAQLI Initiative on Facebook. On Instagram, it is IAAQLI_, and then on YouTube, it is IAAQLI. Make sure you come back so you can hear more about the specific work happening within each of these pillars. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's 6 Pillars in Action podcast and learned more about how the IAAQLI funding is impacting our city. And remember, to stay up to date on what's happening with IAAQLI and the 6 Pillars in Action, subscribe to the podcast in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Play. You can also check out the 6 Pillars in Action newsletter, blogs, and other videos on our website at IAAQLI.org. Until next time, let's continue to celebrate the power of transformation. See you next time.